So this research is about alternative ways of storing data, digital data, for archival purposes with DNA.
The initial thought was, I don't care what I'm building, and so why don't we just build Moby Dick or something? I'll just encode it into DNA, and we'll just build that because I don't want to worry about the design at this point in time.
Sri and I debated what we should encode, what would nicely represent the digital universe, and we wanted something that represented sort of modern digital. So we used an HTML version of a book that I wrote recently called Regenesis. The HTML form, let's say the web form, includes images, digital images. It includes JavaScript programming language that actually does perform something interactively with the person. And so we encoded that into zeros and ones and then into DNA.
We started thinking about, based on some prior work, of thinking about DNA as a source of information storage. Because one, it is very, it's very long-lasting. You can recover DNA over thousands of years. And second, it's a very dense stored information source.
Most non-DNA methods store on a plane. Well, DNA can be stored in a volume. The density is remarkably high, as little as 1 bit per base, 1 base per cubic nanometer. So we can store on the order of almost a zettabyte in a gram of DNA, a milliliter volume.
The theoretical density of a DNA is that you could store the total world's information, which is 1.8 zettabytes, at least in 2011, in about 4 grams of DNA.
And it leverages rapidly improving next generation reading and writing of DNA.
The book we encoded was actually a book that George has written, and in the book is a section on this particular piece of work. So the sentence being shown in the image is almost a meta sentence from the book that says, decoding self-referential DNA, encoding these nodes. And we're able to just show how we take in this particular case, starting with the F in referential and ending in the N in DNA, take it to individual bits, which correspond to ASCII codes, and a barcode, and then we take those ones and zeros and convert them to A, T, C, and G, or DNA bases, where T and G stand for 1, and A and C stand for 0. And so we just add PCR primers to the end of those and synthesize it on a microfluidic chip. And so what's shown is the red barcode and the blue data block, essentially, that's in a larger context of other barcodes and data blocks. And then when we sequence the whole thing, and we'll get many copies of each particular barcode sequence. And then we were able to reconstruct the message, and then we just go back the same way that we encoded it by decoding the message back to ones and zeros and then back to text. And because we have the address, we know where it goes back, so once we sequence everything, we're able to reconstruct what the original message that you're encoding or digital information that you're encoding in there.
So this is a problem that I had been brooding about, thinking about since around the year 2000, when we applied for a DARPA grant on DNA memory, it was called, and slowly it became more and more evident how we could implement this with technologies developed since 2001. And I got excited enough about it and that I went to the bench personally, and Sri Kasuri helped me get oriented on this particular set of tools that I needed.
Initially, I would follow him around to make sure everything was okay, but then within a couple of days, he was just, it was just kind of normal to have George in the lab, which was fun. It was also fun, kind of teaching him some of the newer stuff that wasn't around when he was doing experiments, I guess.
And then Sri and I did a lot of sequence analysis afterwards to see what the error rates and so forth. But Sri clearly was taking the role of a senior investigator, even though technically he was a postdoctoral fellow working with me. and I took on the role of a junior investigator since I was doing a lot of the pipetting and laboratory work. So that was a very pleasant role reversal for me. There are a few things where we may or may not admit it, but they're limited by our storage capabilities. So for example, if we could store everything, we wouldn't be throwing out data. We wouldn't be writing on top of reusing disks and tape drives. If we could store, say, video information over a broad set of the Earth, and then just store it, archive it, until something really good or really bad has occurred in that, and then scrape the data and find out what actually happened in great detail. That's something we wouldn't even consider doing today, but you can imagine very inexpensive biological cameras that could encode it into DNA, and you could have very exhaustive archives of this that would only infrequently be accessed. Or you could imagine other huge data sources like all the neuronal firings in the brain, which could be encoded into DNA, and again, you could do selective reading of that as needed, and so on.
No estoy en contra de la tecnología. Estoy en contra de aquellos que la exaltan a expensas de la verdad del hombre.